The first time the elevator opened on the 11th floor, I barely looked up from the log sheet. I remember that part clearly because I was unscrewing the cap on my thermos with one hand and trying not to drip tea on the desk with the other. I always brought the same thing, strong black tea, so dark it looked almost red under the security desk lamp. The building was shut down for winter renovations, 18 floors of dark offices and plastic-covered furniture. And my nights were usually so boring I could tell what time it was by which part of the heating system started knocking. So when the camera for elevator 2 blinked and showed the doors sliding open on 11, I thought fine, maintenance glitch. The hallway on the screen was empty, gray carpet runner, taped up glass conference wall, exit sign glowing at the far end. The doors opened all the way, stayed like that for a few seconds, then closed again. No movement. Nobody stepping out. Nobody waiting to get in. I took a sip of tea, still hot enough to sting the roof of my mouth. About 10 minutes later, the same elevator opened on the 7th floor and stayed open for so long that I actually set my cup down and leaned toward the monitor. That was the first time I wrote something in the incident log and immediately wished I hadn't, because once you log it, it's real. And once I went upstairs to check it, the night stopped feeling empty. I worked overnight security in an office tower downtown that basically hibernated every winter when the renovation crews came in. Not the whole building exactly, but enough of it that tenants were relocated, regular staff went remote, and the place turned into this half-dead shell for a couple months. During the day there were contractors, cleaners, delivery guys, somebody always hauling wrapped drywall or boxes of light fixtures through the service corridor. At night, none of that. Just me, the front desk, 12 camera feeds cycling on the monitor wall, and the low hum of a building keeping itself alive. It wasn't glamorous work, but I liked routine, and overnight routine is very clean. You check the access logs, you note any alarms, you do your patrols on the hour, you make sure no one is where they shouldn't be. The entire point is that nothing happens. I was good at it too. I don't mean in some heroic way. I mean I knew the systems. I knew which loading dock contact liked to throw a fault when the temperature dropped. I knew the difference between an elevator door sensor issue and somebody forcing the panel. I knew which camera on the 12th floor had a dead spot near the copy room because the ceiling tile above it had shifted 2 inches after a leak the year before, and I never left the desk unattended unless I absolutely had to. That was my thing. Everybody on that rotation had their thing. One guy brought crossword books. One guy watched baseball highlights with the sound off. I brought a dented stainless steel thermos full of black tea and treated that desk like a post. If I got up for patrol, I locked the inner office, clipped the radio to my belt, and I moved fast. The night this happened was in early December, cold enough that you could feel the draft around the front doors even with the vestibule sealed. The lobby had that dry winter smell, heated air and floor polish, and a little bit of dust from the renovation work higher up. Most of the building lights were on skeleton mode, hallways lit, tenant spaces mostly dark, enough to see, not enough to feel normal. My shift started at 11. By midnight I'd already done 1 full patrol and nothing was out of place. No alarms, no access events, no surprise maintenance workers lingering after hours. I had my tea, my logbook, and an hour and 20 minutes of the kind of quiet you stop noticing. Then elevator 2 opened on the 11th floor. Like I said the first time I wrote it off, elevators do weird things when a building's half-active and people have been in the service panels all week. Maybe somebody during the day forgot to disable a floor call. Maybe the car reset. Maybe the door operator hiccuped. Whatever. But when it happened again on the 7th floor around 1:20 in the morning, and the doors stayed open for almost a full minute with no one there, I couldn't ignore it. I watched the timestamp on the feed while the doors sat open. The hall was still. No motion from either direction. The little recessed cans in the ceiling lit this narrow strip of carpet and beige wall, and beyond that it just fell off into office darkness through the glass entry to a tenant suite that wasn't even occupied at the moment. Then the doors started to close. They got about 3/4 of the way and hesitated. Not a full reopen, more like a shutter, a tiny correction. Then they finished closing. That looked less like a system glitch and more like a door alignment problem, which meant if the car got stuck between floors later, now it was my report and my headache in the morning. So I did what I hated doing. I locked the security office behind the desk, set my thermos beside the keyboard, grabbed the radio, and went up. The elevator ride itself was normal, which almost annoyed me. I'd half expected some obvious mechanical issue, grinding or a delay in the floor indicators. But the car was smooth and the panel responded fine. By the time I got to 7, I was already settling back into the idea that this was just a maintenance note and I'd be downstairs in 3 minutes. The 7th floor smelled like joint compound and old carpet glue. Renovation smell. The main corridor lights were on, but one of the bulbs near the east suite flickered in a slow, lazy way, just enough to make the walls look like they were breathing if you looked too long. Elevator 2 was closed when I stepped out. That gave me a second of relief I probably shouldn't admit, because I actually thought, good, I can write this off. Then I noticed the seam. The doors weren't fully flush. Not open, not exactly. Just slightly off, maybe the width of a finger at the center. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't have noticed. There was no call button lit outside, no service key in the panel, nothing to say anybody had been there. But the doors had that misaligned look they get when they try to shut on something soft and don't quite settle right. I walked up and put my hand near the seam. Cold metal. No resistance. I pressed the call button once. Nothing happened for a second or two. Then the doors corrected themselves with a little thump and opened cleanly. The car was empty. No smell of cigarette smoke, no drop tool bag, no coffee cup, nothing. Just the usual elevator interior with the stainless kick plates and the inspection certificate behind scratched plastic. I checked the floor selector panel. No lights except 7. I hit lobby, doors closed. The car went down. I stood there listening to the shaft for a second. Just cables and the distant machinery hum. All right, I thought. Door issue. Put it in the book. Tell maintenance. That was the first release. The first point where I could have convinced myself the night was normal again. I did one fast walk of the 7th floor while I was there, just because I was already up. Locked tenant suites, plastic runners taped over part of the carpet, a stack of wrapped office chairs near the north conference room, everything exactly as it had been on my midnight round. When I got back to the lobby a few minutes later, the desk looked the same as I left it. Thermos where I set it. Monitor wall running. Quiet. I remember feeling almost embarrassed at how seriously I'd taken the elevator thing. Then one of the camera feeds behind the desk caught movement. Not in the main lobby. in the little secured area behind reception, the side where visitors normally never go. The camera there was mounted high and angled toward the rear access door and the copy alcove. On the screen at the far left edge, I saw what looked like part of a person. Just a shoulder at first. Dark fabric, maybe a coat sleeve. Somebody standing close enough to the wall that only a slice of them was in frame. I turned around in my chair right away, because that area was physically behind me. Maybe 20 feet back past the decorative wood divider and the locked gate that separated the public side of the lobby from the building operations side. From the desk where I sat, I couldn't directly see that corner without getting up. Nothing moved behind me. I looked back at the screen. Same shoulder. Same stillness. That was strange, but still explainable. Reflection off the lobby glass. Camera lag. A day cleaner who got left in the building and found some dumb place to stand while using a phone. There are always explanations at first, that's part of the job. If you go straight to worst case every time a camera does something odd, you won't last a week. I got up, keyed through the side gate and checked. The secured area was empty. Copy alcove clear. Rear access door closed and mag locked. Cleaning closet shut. Nobody behind the column where the shoulder had been. Nothing on the floor. No noise except the muted HVAC rushing through vents overhead. I stood there long enough to hear my own jacket sleeve brushing when I breathed. Then I walked back out, sat down and took another sip of tea that had gone from hot to just warm. Second release. This one didn't hold as long. I pulled up the access log on the terminal. No card swipes at the rear door, no stairwell alarms, no forced open alerts. Front entrance still secure. Parking garage secure. Loading dock secure. The system was boring, which normally I liked. That night it felt like being lied to. I told myself the camera had picked up me when I got up from the desk. That was the simplest version. Bad angle, motion blur, nothing to see. So I rewound it. The shoulder had appeared before I stood up. I watched it 3 times. The timestamp on the recording advanced exactly right. The camera angle hadn't changed. There was just that small portion of somebody standing inside a secured space where the system said nobody was. I remember rubbing my thumb over the dent in the side of the thermos without realizing I was doing it. Little habits come out when your mind is trying not to commit to what your eyes are telling you. I was still looking at the replay when elevator 2 opened on the 11th floor again. I didn't even hear it, obviously. Cameras have no sound in that setup. But I saw the doors slide apart on the monitor and my stomach did this weird drop because it was the same elevator and the same kind of empty hallway and no person coming in or out. I checked elevator 1, parked at lobby. Checked stairwell cameras for 11, empty. Checked the service elevator, parked on 3. 11 stayed open for maybe 15 seconds this time, then closed. I picked up the radio to call the after-hours engineering number, then put it back down because I didn't want to be the guy waking somebody over a door issue and a maybe reflection on a camera. That sounds stupid now. At the time it felt reasonable. I did what trained people do when they don't want to admit a situation has left the normal categories. I went narrower, more procedural. I started checking timestamps, comparing feeds, looking for a technical answer. And while I was doing that, something moved on the camera behind me again. This time there was more of them. Not the whole body. I don't want to pretend I got some clean look, but enough that it wasn't a reflection and it wasn't a coat on a hook, and it definitely wasn't me. A torso angled slightly toward the camera. One arm down at the side, head just out of frame. I stood up so fast my chair rolled back and hit the credenza. When I turned around, the secured area behind the reception wall was still empty from where I was standing. Dead empty. No one crossing the open floor. No door opening. No sound. I didn't go back there right away. That's the part where my own behavior changed and I noticed it changing. Up to then I had moved like I always moved in that building. Efficient. Direct. Once I saw that second image, I found myself listening first, looking at the reflection in the glass before I looked into the space itself, thinking about whether somebody could be watching me do that. That feeling, more than anything visual, is what got under my skin, not seeing a person. Acting like I was already being observed by one. I took the handheld flashlight from the drawer even though the lobby lights were fully on. I unhooked the spare office key. Then I went through the gate again. Empty. I checked the rear door by hand. Locked. I checked the closet. Empty. I checked behind the half-height file cabinets where vendors used to leave sign in sheets. Nothing there except an old roll of caution tape and a box of visitor badges nobody needed anymore. There was this faint smell back there that I hadn't noticed before. Not strong, just cold air and something damp like wet wool that had mostly dried. It didn't belong in that part of the building. I stood still and listened. Somewhere far up in the tower a pipe clicked. That was all. I came back to the desk irritated now, more than scared. Irritated because I was being pulled into something that wasn't leaving evidence. Irritated because my tea was cooling and my chair was still crooked from when I knocked it back and I could feel the night losing its shape. I sat down, straightened the logbook, put the flashlight within reach instead of back in the drawer. Third release, if you can call it that. Not really relief anymore. Just a pause. I decided I would do one thing and then one other thing. Call engineering, and if they didn't answer, I would shut down elevator 2 remotely and write it up for morning. That's all. That's procedure. That's a box you can stand inside. I reached for the phone. Before I touched it, it rang. Desk phone, sharp, ordinary internal ring. I looked at the display. It was an extension from the 11th floor. For a second, I honestly thought maybe that was the answer. Some contractor had fallen asleep in a suite, woke up, got turned around, found a phone. That was so much better than everything else that my brain grabbed onto it hard. I picked up. All I heard was open air. No voice. No breathing I could make out. Just the flat, faint room tone of a line that's connected somewhere quiet. Maybe a little mechanical hiss. Security desk, I said. Nothing. I was already turning toward the monitor wall while I said it, because the ring itself had knocked me out of the idea that I had time. And that's when I saw the camera behind reception. The angle hadn't changed. The lighting hadn't changed. But the person was no longer half out of frame. They were standing directly in the center of the image, inside the locked lobby area behind me, facing the camera. Dark coat, maybe dark hair or a hood, I couldn't tell. Head lifted just enough that I had the sick, immediate understanding they were looking straight into it. Straight into the lens. Which meant they knew where the camera was. Which meant they knew the building, or they had taken time to study it, and that thought landed harder than seeing them at all. I dropped the phone without remembering to hang it up. The plastic receiver swung and hit the side of the desk. Every instinct I had said, do not turn your back slowly and go check. Up to that point, I'd been treating each thing as its own problem. Elevator, camera, access logs. The second I saw that figure centered in frame, the problems became one problem. I stood up and locked eyes with the empty open lobby in front of me for maybe half a second, because my body didn't want to turn around even though the threat was behind me. My hands had started doing that clumsy cold thing where your fingers don't quite line up with what you're reaching for. The phone was still off the hook, and through the tiny speaker I could hear that nothing, that empty line sound. Then a second line started ringing. Not the phone in my hand, the other line on the desk. Different tone. I looked at that display. Another internal extension. 7th floor. I don't know if the first caller had hung up and dialed again from somewhere else. I don't know if there were 2 phones involved. I don't know if that even makes sense with the timing. I just know one line was live from 11 and the other started ringing from 7. And behind me on the monitor a person stood in a secured area that should have been impossible to enter. I didn't look over my shoulder. I grabbed the inner office key, backed into the security office behind the reception desk, shut the door and locked it. That room was barely more than a closet with monitors and a filing cabinet, but it had a solid core door and no public sightline, and at that point I cared more about one locked barrier than I did about dignity or training. The 2 phone lines kept going. Ring, stop. Ring, stop. Sometimes together, sometimes one after the other. I did not answer them. I did not check the cameras again.
People ask me that part when I tell this story, and I understand why. They say, why didn't you just look? You had the monitors right there. But that's exactly why I didn't. Because I knew if I looked and the figure was gone, I'd hear them differently in the building. And if I looked and the figure was still there, then I was sitting in a locked room in a sealed tower with somebody moving freely through spaces they should not have been able to enter.
There was no version of looking that helped me. So I sat on the floor with my back against the filing cabinet, flashlight in one hand, radio in the other, and listened to the phones ring until they stopped. Then the silence got worse. Every building has settling noises, especially in winter. Expanding pipes, elevator relays, air handlers cycling, the little flecks and tick of temperature moving through steel and glass. I knew all of them. I knew which ones belonged. What I heard outside that office after the calls stopped was not loud. That's the worst thing about it. Loud gives you shape. Loud gives you confidence. This was softer than that. A shoe brushing carpet. Then nothing. A pause long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it. Then the faintest contact against the outer desk. Not a bang, more like fingertips or knuckles resting there by accident. I kept thinking, if someone says something normal through the door, if they just say, hey, I got locked in, I can work with that. I can call police. I can start a real process. But nobody said anything. At one point the outer phone rang again and I nearly shouted just from the sound of it. I didn't answer. I called my supervisor from my cell instead. He sounded half asleep, told me to stay put, said he was contacting police and morning building management. His voice was calm in that practiced management way that made me feel both better and much worse. Better because somebody else officially knew. Worse because even while I was explaining it, I could hear how impossible it sounded. Police did come by at some point before dawn. They checked the exterior first, Then waited for building management with override access because I wasn't opening that office door for anybody I hadn't visually confirmed, and I wasn't about to lean out into the lobby to confirm anything. By the time they got into the building proper and swept the relevant floors, there was nobody there. Morning staff started arriving just after sunrise, bringing with them normal sounds that had never felt so welcome. Rolling carts, voices in the vestibule, keys, the front doors unlocking, human noise with daylight behind it. When I finally came out of that office, my tea was stone cold in the thermos cap where I'd left it. The phone receiver was still dangling. The lobby looked untouched, no sign of forced entry, no rear doors open, no footprints that meant anything on the polished floor, no tools left behind. Nothing. Access logs showed no entry all night other than mine. No alarms had triggered. No forced open events. No stairwell breaches. Nothing to explain a person moving from the 11th floor to the 7th floor to the locked area behind my desk without a single system notice. Building management tried to fold it back into a mechanical issue. Elevator malfunction, camera artifact, stress. That's the neat version. The reportable version. The version that lets everybody keep using the building. Maybe some of it was mechanical, I don't know. I know what I saw on that camera, and I know what extension numbers called my desk. I finished out that week, because that's what you do when you're middle-aged and you've got bills and a job that still expects you Monday night whether you slept or not. But I changed after that. I kept the inner office key in my pocket. I stopped mocking people for over-reporting little things. I started noticing how many overnight guards have weird personal rules they never explain, like always facing a certain hallway or never using one particular elevator after midnight. If all the access points were secured and the log showed no entry, then somebody already understood that building better than the people responsible for it. And sometimes I still wonder if the reason nothing on my shift made sense is because it wasn't the first time they'd done it, just the first time somebody stayed alive and quiet long enough to write it down. Story 2. The next one comes from a very different kind of shift, but the part that gets under your skin is the same. Somebody knew exactly how the night was supposed to go. By the time he said my full name, the gate was already halfway down. I had one hand on the metal pull strap and the other on my phone because I always checked my closing note one last time before locking up. The mall had been closed for a while by then. Quiet in that awful fake clean way empty malls get at night, when all the bright music and weekend energy are gone and what's left is just the shine on the tile and a cleaning machine whining somewhere far off. I heard footsteps coming up the corridor and figured it was mall security doing their loop. Then a man stopped right outside the opening under the gate and said my first and last name like we knew each other. Not the nickname on my badge, my actual name. I looked up so fast I almost dropped my phone. He wasn't dressed weird, that's what made it worse. Dark jacket, regular jeans, haircut short, maybe late 30s, maybe a little older. Clean, calm, not drunk, not twitchy, not obviously anything. Just a guy standing in the empty mall outside my store while I was trying to close. For maybe 2 seconds I thought I knew him and had forgotten from where. Then he smiled a little and said, "You always check your phone right before you lock the gate." I didn't answer. He bent slightly, not all the way down, just enough to look through the narrowing space as I kept pulling the gate lower, and he said, "Still calm, you missed a step tonight." That was when I felt my hands stop working right. I worked the closing shift at a clothing store in a mall because I needed the hours and they kept putting me on nights. There wasn't some deeper reason than that. Rent was high, my classes were part-time, and closing shifts were the ones nobody wanted because they ended late and managers loved making the younger employees do all the detail stuff after the customers were gone. I hated being alone in that store. Not during the day. During the day it was whatever. Loud music, messy fitting rooms, people asking if we had something in another size, the usual. But after 9, when the last customers drifted out and the employee chatter was gone, and the storefronts all turned into dark rectangles with their gates pulled down, the whole mall started feeling too big for the number of people still in it. Usually there were still some workers around. A food court cleaner stacking chairs. Somebody from the sneaker store dragging out trash bags. Security on a little electric cart if you were lucky. But it never felt like enough people to matter if something weird happened. And because I was exactly the kind of person who gets nervous and makes dumb mistakes when nervous, I started keeping my closing checklist in my phone notes app. Not because the job was hard, just because there were a lot of tiny things and I hated getting home and realizing I'd forgotten one. Count register, lock cash drawer, check fitting rooms, shut stockroom light, reset thermostat, back door, front display plugs, music off, gate down, final lock. Stuff like that. If I tried to keep it in my head, I'd skip something and spend the whole walk to my car replaying it. So every night I pulled up the same note and went down it in order. My coworkers made fun of me a little. Not mean, just normal work teasing. They said I treated closing like I was launching a rocket. I didn't care. The note kept me from second-guessing myself. That mall closed at 9. My shift usually ran until around 10 because there was always more to do than management admitted. Fold the wrecked tables. Put away returns. Rehang the stuff customers left inside out in the fitting rooms. Spray that cheap vanilla air freshener that was supposed to make the store smell expensive and just made it smell like sweet plastic. The night this happened had been slow. Weeknight. Cold outside, not many people. I remember I was wearing this oversized store sweater we weren't really supposed to wear off the sales floor because I was freezing, and my feet hurt from standing in the same flat boots for hours. I also remember my manager leaving early and saying, "Just text me when you're locked up," which I always thought was funny because if anything actually happened, what was I supposed to do? Text her from inside the emergency? By a little after 9:30, the store was empty except for me. I did my normal routine. Checked the fitting rooms. Turned off the music. Counted the register twice because I got distracted the first time. Opened my phone note. Started going line by line. Nothing weird yet, nothing movie-like. Just me doing the thing I always did because I wanted to go home. Then I started lowering the gate and heard footsteps in the corridor. Like I said, I thought security. The corridor outside our store was mostly dark by then. Not pitch black, because the mall kept those overhead lights on low, but dim enough that the shiny floor reflected more light than it gave. Stores across from us were already gated. The little kiosk in the middle of the aisle was covered with a tarp that made it look like a body-sized lump. You could see all the way down toward the Anchor department store, and it was basically empty. This man came out of that dim stretch like he'd been walking there for a while. Normal pace. Hands empty. Looking right at me. He said my name. First and last. I know the first thing I thought, and it wasn't danger. It was embarrassment. Because when someone knows you and you don't know them, your first reaction is usually that you've forgotten something obvious. Customer from earlier. Friend of a coworker. Somebody who recognized me from class, maybe. So I gave him this uncertain smile and said, "Sorry, do I know you?" He didn't answer that. He just looked at my phone in my hand and said, "You always look at that before the lock." Something in the way he said always made my stomach tighten. Not because it was impossible. People notice routines. Retail people do repetitive stuff in public all the time. Anybody could have walked by on another night and seen me checking my phone while I closed. But he said it with this calm certainty that made it sound like he hadn't noticed it once. He'd noticed it enough times to own it. I stepped back into the store without really deciding to. Just one step, then another. The gate was still coming down because I'd been pulling it while he talked, and now it was at chest height. He crouched slightly to keep my face in view through the gap. That image is the one that still bothers me the most, honestly. Not some dramatic charge or him rattling the gate, just a man politely lowering himself to keep eye contact with me through the closing bars like he had all the time in the world. I said, "We're closed," which was stupid, obviously. He knew we were closed. He nodded almost like I had told him something helpful and said, "I know. You're usually done before 10. Usually. That word hit me harder than the name. I looked past him down the mall instinctively, hoping to see literally anybody else. A cleaner. A security guard. Another employee from some other store. There was movement way down near the food court, but too far to matter. Just a machine buffer or a person pushing one. The sound of it was there, this low droning whine, but it might as well have been on another planet. Exposed is the only word I have for how it felt. Bright enough that I knew he could see me clearly. Open enough that I could see the empty hallway behind him. Public enough that help should have existed somewhere, but not close enough to actually become real. I said, "Sir, you need to leave." Still calm, he said, "You forgot something in the back." That snapped me out of the weird social part of it for a second because it was such a strange thing to say. Not threatening exactly, not loud, just specific. "I didn't," I said, but my voice came out thin. He lifted one shoulder like maybe I knew better than he did. Then he said, "Check your list." And I hate this part because even now, after everything, I know exactly why I listened. Because the note was my system, my safe little routine. If he was bluffing, checking it would prove that. If he wasn't bluffing, then I wanted to know how much he knew. Also, if you've ever worked retail, you know how strong the fear of having missed a closing step can get in your head. It's irrational, but it sits there. Did I really lock the cash drawer? Did I really switch off the fitting room lights? Did I really do the back door? You replay the same 5 things until you can't trust your memory. So I looked at my phone. The note was already open, same lines I'd seen 100 times. Count register, cash drawer, fitting rooms, thermostat, music, displays, and at the bottom, under the last line, was a sentence I had never typed. "Back door doesn't lock properly." I actually stared at it long enough that the words blurred a little. I know how that sounds. I know the obvious answer is you forgot you typed it earlier, or somebody at work was messing with you, or maybe you copied something by accident. I went through every single one of those in my head in maybe half a second. No, that line was not there before. I knew because I read that note the same way every night, in the same order, and I always ended on final lock. That's how I remembered I was done. Final lock was the bottom line. Seeing another sentence below it felt physically wrong. like finding an extra stair where there wasn't supposed to be one. Before I could even fully process it, I heard a faint click from the stockroom. Not loud, just the tiny metallic movement of a door handle being tried once. The back door was through the stockroom, past 2 racks of overstocked jeans and a wall of cardboard boxes. You couldn't see it from the sales floor. At night, the stockroom always smelled like dust and fabric dye and the lemon cleaner we used on the counter. I stood there staring toward that dark opening while my whole body seemed to pull in 2 directions at once. Part of me wanted to run to the back and prove nothing was there. The other part knew that was exactly the worst possible place to go. The man outside the gate didn't move. He didn't have to. He already knew where my attention had gone. And that calm was what made it real. If he'd acted wild or aggressive, I think my brain would have filed him under obvious danger and I could have reacted faster. But calm makes you negotiate with yourself. Calm makes you wonder if you're overreacting. Calm is how people get too close. I backed away from the stockroom opening and grabbed the gate strap with both hands. He said my name again. I don't know if he meant it as a warning or if he was just seeing whether I'd stop. I didn't. I yanked the gate down hard enough that it rattled the whole storefront and the metal slammed into the floor track. He stepped back at the last second, still not hurrying, and I dropped to one knee to shove the lock through before my fingers lost the shape of it. The lock clicked shut. That sound helped more than anything else had. I stood up and immediately moved to the front of the store, right where the corridor cameras would see me and where anybody looking down the aisle could see me too. I did not go anywhere near the stockroom. I called mall security with shaking hands and spoke way too fast the first time. Had to repeat myself, then switched to speaker because I didn't want one ear blocked. The man watched me while I talked. Not angry. Not panicked. Just watching. Security said they were on the way and asked if the person was trying to get in. I looked straight at him and said, "Not yet." That got a reaction weirdly. Not from him. From me. Saying it out loud made the whole thing sharper. He smiled then. Small. More like he'd been amused by my answer than threatened by security. He raised one hand, not waving exactly, just a little acknowledgement, and then he turned and started walking down the corridor. No rush, no last comment. Just walked away into the dim section of the mall past the covered kiosk and the dark jewelry store and disappeared around the corner like he already knew nobody would be there to stop him. Security got to me maybe 3 minutes later, maybe 4. It felt longer. 2 guards, one older guy who'd worked there forever and one younger one I hadn't seen before. They checked the corridor first, then the back service hall, then stayed while I unlocked the front gate enough for them to come inside. I made them check the stockroom before I moved. The back door was shut, locked according to them. No sign of forced entry, no person waiting behind the racks, nothing. I showed them the note on my phone. The older guard squinted at it and said, "Maybe he saw you type it." I said I didn't type it. He shrugged in that tired mall security way that basically means, "I believe you're upset." Not necessarily your version of why. We checked the employee hall camera later with one of the mall supervisors. They found footage of the man walking near my store before closing, then again a little after. Not close enough to see much. No clean face shot. No badge from another store. No obvious connection to me. just a person who should not have been lingering in a closed mall that late. What they didn't find was how he knew my name, not the name on my badge, my full name, first and last, and they definitely didn't find how he knew my routine well enough to mention the phone, the timing, the fact that I checked that note right before the final lock. For a while I tried very hard to solve it in normal ways. Maybe he'd heard a coworker say it. Maybe he shopped there more often than I realized. Maybe he'd seen me do the same closing pattern enough nights in a row to map it out. People watch more than you think. That's true, but the note is what keeps wrecking every explanation. It was my private phone, my note app. No shared work tablet, no store login, no reason anyone but me should have been editing anything there. I changed my passwords after that, turned off previews, started locking my screen constantly. I even copied the checklist onto paper for a while because I couldn't stand opening that note at work. I still do closing tasks in my head in the same order sometimes, even though I don't work there anymore. And I still have a screenshot of that note with the extra line at the bottom, because I needed proof that it had been there even if the proof doesn't explain who knew I'd read it before I ever looked at the back door. Story 3. The last one is the one I keep coming back to, mostly because it almost let me relax in the middle. That's what makes the ending stick. I didn't notice the door was open again until I came back down the hall with my meter in one hand and the clipboard tucked under my arm. It wasn't wide open. That's important. If it had been standing there fully open, I would have reacted differently. It was just off the latch by a couple inches, enough that the dark room behind it showed as a black vertical line against the brighter hallway. I remember stopping and looking at it and thinking, no, I shut that. Not in a dramatic way. More annoyed than anything. I was carrying tools, wearing one earbud half out because my noise-canceling set had cut weirdly a minute earlier, and I thought maybe the door closer was loose or I'd bumped it with a cart. Then I heard that dragging sound again, somewhere farther down the wing, slow and soft and so brief I couldn't even tell what direction it came from. That's when I pulled both earbuds out and listened. Nothing. No voices, no carts, no machinery cycling. Just that renovation wing quiet that feels wrong in a hospital. Because hospitals are supposed to sound alive even at night. I worked maintenance for a hospital system, mostly electrical and facilities stuff, and I was used to being alone. Honestly, I preferred it. Day shifts meant too many interruptions, too many people wanting updates while you were trying to actually fix something. Nights in empty areas were easier. You got a task list, went where you needed to go, and got it done without somebody asking every 10 minutes if the lights would be back on soon. The wing they'd assigned me that night had been shut down for renovations for a while. Not abandoned exactly. Just stripped back and waiting. No patients, no active nursing stations, no equipment in use. Some rooms had beds wrapped in plastic. Some were empty except for marked wall cuts and coils of cable. Partial power only, enough for lights in the corridor and the systems we needed to monitor. The rest of the main hospital was fully active on the other side of the fire doors, but this section felt like a paused version of the building. I like jobs like that. Give me a quiet floor, a list of panels to check, and a reason to keep moving room to room, and I'm fine. I wore noise-canceling earbuds more than I should have, even when I was alone, because it kept the repetitive mechanical noise from grinding on me. Usually low music, sometimes just white noise. My supervisor hated it if he caught me. But on closed wings at night, nobody was around to care. The job that night was simple. Check electrical panels, verify readings, log a couple temporary circuits feeding contractor lights, and make sure the breaker labels match the updated plan. Routine stuff. I had my meter, flashlight, clipboard, and a zip hoodie that smelled faintly like dust because every maintenance hoodie does after a while. It was cold outside and you could feel it through the older windows on that side of the hospital. Not enough to freeze the corridors, but enough that every room near the exterior wall had a dry, chilly edge to it. Mixed with the renovation dust and the hospital disinfectant smell that never really leaves, the whole place had this sterile winter feeling. Clean but not comfortable. I started a little after midnight. The first hour was exactly what it should have been. Room to room. Open panel, check reading, make note, close panel. Some areas under brighter work lights, some under dimmer temporary fixtures that made everything look flatter than normal. Plastic sheeting taped over one nurse's station. Covered monitors stacked against a wall. My own footsteps and the soft thud of doors latching behind me. That's why the first wrong thing barely registered. I closed a patient room door after checking the panel inside and moved on. Maybe 5 minutes later I came back that way and saw it cracked open those couple inches. I thought I hadn't latched it properly. End of mystery. I pushed it shut and kept going. A few rooms later I set my clipboard on a counter while I checked a junction box above a sink. I remember doing that because I balanced the flashlight beside it and told myself not to forget either one. When I finished and stepped down, the flashlight was still there. The clipboard was on the floor. Again, easy explanation. Slick counter. My sleeve knocked it. The cheap metal clip made it front heavy. I picked it up, brushed dust off the edge, and kept going. What started to bother me wasn't any one thing. It was the way each small thing made me double back mentally. Did I actually shut that door? Did I place the clipboard there or somewhere else? Did I hear something just now, or did the earbuds cut in a weird way? That last part happened next. My earbuds glitched for maybe 2 seconds. One side went dead, then the other, then both cut to silence. And through that silence I heard a dragging sound from somewhere down the corridor. Not a crash. Not a tool drop, more like something with weight being pulled a short distance over vinyl flooring, then stopped. I took the earbuds out right away and stood there listening. The corridor ahead of me was empty, bright in sections, dim in sections. Closed room doors on both sides, little paper signs taped to some of them for contractor notes. At the far end, the temporary plastic divider moved just slightly from airflow, making a tiny whispering sound. Nothing else. I waited, still listening, and because I couldn't hear it anymore, I did what people always do. I made it normal. Maybe a rolling cart settling. Maybe somebody in the active part of the hospital moving equipment, and the sound bounced weird through the wing. Hospitals are full of weird acoustics. I put one earbud back in, but not both. That right there tells you I wasn't relaxed anymore. I started noticing how often I checked behind me, how I kept glancing at the little square window in each door before I passed it. Not because I expected to see someone, but because it felt bad not to. It's strange how fast your body can decide you're being watched before your brain is willing to say it. I went on with the checklist because that's what competence looks like when it's under pressure. You keep doing the task. You get more exact. You tell yourself if there were really another person in the wing, you'd hear them, or see a badge light, or catch a door swing in your peripheral vision. Then I reached the main exit door I'd come through at the start of the job. It had a temporary chain on it, not a permanent chain. One of those contractor-grade chains looped through the crash bar with a padlock hanging on it. Not fancy. Not built in. Just enough to stop the door from opening inward. I stood there with my hand on the bar for a second, not fully understanding what I was seeing because it didn't match my memory at all. That door had definitely not been chained when I entered. I would have noticed, because I came in carrying tools and had to shoulder it open. There is no chance I would have forgotten a chain. I checked it anyway. Pressed the bar. Tight. Metal contact, no give. I looked at the floor around it like there might be some obvious clue there. Fresh footprints in dust, abandoned lock package, anything. But the floor was mostly clean except for the usual contractor prints and my own. This was the point where the situation crossed from irritating to unacceptable. Door reopening is one thing. Clipboard falling is one thing. A sound with no source is one thing. Somebody securing your exit from the inside on a closed wing is not one thing. I stepped back and actually listened to the space around me. Really listened, the way you do when you stop pretending you're alone in a place that suddenly doesn't feel empty. My own breathing sounded too loud. Somewhere far off, deeper in the wing, a door clicked. Not slammed, just clicked shut. I took my phone out and called a coworker. Not security, not my supervisor, not yet. I know that probably sounds backward, but in maintenance there are a lot of dumb, undocumented things people do in closed areas. Temporary chains, contractor locks, random reroutes. Somebody deciding a hallway needed to stay sealed and forgetting to mention it to anyone. I wanted a dumb answer before I escalated it into a whole hospital issue. The coworker who picked up had been on that project during the day the week before. I asked him, trying to sound casual and not quite pulling it off, if anybody had started chaining interior exits in the renovation wing. He was quiet for a second, then said sometimes contractors secure doors without logging it. Use the secondary near the old imaging rooms. Sometimes. That word helped. Maybe too much. I asked if he was sure the secondary was open. He said, yeah, usually, unless fire safety had it tied off, but it should open to the lit main hallway near the service elevators. There was enough annoyance in his voice that I almost relaxed right then. Not because he was especially reassuring, but because his attitude made it sound boring, like I was calling about a paperwork problem. So I told myself that was it. Poor communication. Temporary chain. Somebody working earlier did something dumb and didn't note it. The dragging sound was probably contractor trash. The door I'd closed was old and didn't latch right. The clipboard slid. That was the false resolution, though I obviously didn't know that at the time. It felt earned. That's the worst part. I had explanations for everything. Not perfect explanations, but workable ones. The kind you accept at 1 a.m. because you're tired and still have a list in your hand. I headed toward the secondary exit. The corridor there narrowed where they had stacked some empty bed frames against the wall. Plastic covers rustled faintly in the airflow from temporary heaters. One of the overhead lights buzzed. My left earbud was still hanging around my neck by the cord, tapping lightly against my chest when I walked. No more dragging sound. No more doors moving. I reached the secondary exit, pushed the crash bar and the door opened immediately. Warm, bright light from the active hospital hallway spilled across the threshold. That alone changed everything in my body. You don't realize how tense you've gotten until normal space shows up again. There were real hospital sounds out there. Distant conversation, wheels on polished floor, an overhead page somewhere too muffled to make out. I stepped through and actually laughed once under my breath, just from the release of it. Poor communication, I thought again. That's all. I moved maybe 15 feet down the main hallway toward the service elevators, already thinking about how annoyed I'd be if I had to walk around and re-enter later to get back to the chain door and finish the panel list. Then something made me turn around. I don't know if it was a noise or just one of those body checks you do when you feel watched. I wish I could tell you exactly what triggered it. I can't. I just know I stopped and looked back at the renovation wing door. It was one of those heavier fire doors with a rectangular glass panel in the upper half. Because the main hallway behind me was bright and the wing beyond it was dim, the glass worked like a reflection first and a window second. I could see my own outline faintly, the fluorescent strip overhead, the opposite wall behind me, and I could see the door moving, not swinging shut all the way. Slowly closing from the position I'd left it in, easing inward on the hinge until it was almost closed. Then it stopped halfway. Not slammed, not caught by the closer. Stopped. The kind of stop a door makes when something on the other side is holding it. I felt it before I understood it. That same full body drop I'd had with the chained exit, except sharper. I took one step back toward the door before my brain caught up and told me not to. In the reflection on the glass, inside the dark wing, there was a figure standing just behind the door. I need to be careful here because I don't want to exaggerate what I saw. It was not a clear face. It was not some perfect silhouette. The lighting was wrong for that. What I saw was the shape of a person where no person should have been. Positioned exactly in the section of corridor I'd been working in minutes earlier, dark against dark, upright and still, and because the glass reflected the lit hallway too, the figure seemed to exist in two places at once, inside the wing and over my own shoulder in the reflection. It made the distance hard to judge. It made it feel like if I stepped closer to confirm it, I'd be giving away too much. I didn't move. Neither did the figure. There was no wave, no charge, no attempt to push through the door. Just that presence, held in the glass, like they'd been standing there long enough to watch me leave and had chosen that exact moment to let me see them. My skin went prickly along the back of my neck first. Then my hands started to tingle. I remember noticing absurd details because that's what happens when your mind can't handle the whole thing at once. A smudge on the glass at shoulder height, the little squeak of a cartwheel somewhere down the active hallway, the way my earbud cord had twisted around my hoodie string. Then I heard a tiny metallic sound from the other side of the door. Not loud, just metal shifting against metal. Chain. That was enough for me. I backed up without taking my eyes off the glass until I was far enough into the active hallway that the reflection changed and the dark interior swallowed more of whatever had been there. A nurse coming off another corridor asked if I was okay, and I said, "Can you call security to this wing?" in a voice that did not sound like mine. I didn't go back in. Security came, then facilities supervision. Then one of the project managers who looked annoyed at being dragged in at that hour until he saw my face and stopped talking for a minute. By the time anybody opened that renovation door and checked the wing, the chain on the main exit was gone. Gone. Not cut. Not hanging open. just not there. We walked the whole wing. Every room I'd been in looked the way I'd left it. Panels closed. Tools where I remembered setting them down. No sign of another worker. No sign of somebody bedding down in an empty room. No discarded jacket, no food wrapper, no flashlight. No reason for a person to have been standing in there watching me from behind the glass. They checked access logs after that. No one else was signed into the wing, no contractors scheduled, no maintenance partner assigned with me, no security escort wandering around, nothing. The project manager tried to suggest I'd seen a reflection of myself. I said no, not because I wanted it to be more dramatic, because I know what my own body looks like in a glass panel. This figure had been deeper in the dark, behind the door, standing where I had just spent the last hour moving alone through rooms I thought were empty. I filed a report. So did security. Everybody used careful language because that's what institutions do when something happens that doesn't fit neatly on a form. Possible unauthorized person. Temporary door security unexplained. No visual confirmation by secondary responding staff, those kinds of phrases. I went home after that and didn't sleep much. The next day, when I unpacked my tools to get ready for another job, I realized my clipboard was missing. At first I thought I'd left it in the truck, then in the shop, then maybe on a counter in the wing during the walkthrough. I checked everywhere. So did the hospital when I called. Nobody found it. Every room in that wing had been exactly as I'd left it, except the one thing that had moved once already and had my handwritten readings for the night on it was now gone completely. If no one else was logged working that wing, then somebody reopened doors, moved objects, secured an exit from the inside, stood behind that glass after I had already stepped out, and left with the only item in that whole corridor that had my handwriting on it.